We are very honored today to have a real world global expert on the whole subject of project management. He is Antonio Nieto Rodriguez, and he is the author of the book, The Project Management Handbook from Harvard Business Review, with the subtitle of How to Launch, Lead, and Sponsor Successful Projects. And dear God Almighty, we need to know an awful lot more how to do that successfully. It is a great read. It is a fantastic read. I have to say, I'd highly recommend it. Full of really great information because, as you know, as Antonio says in the book, we are in that project economy. It is not something that is just a kind of a side thing in business. It is actually now, and he refers to this as the organization of dexterity, where we have to both run and change the business simultaneously. So, world-renowned expert, lectures, writes, works with top-class organizations in the world on the whole subject of project management, and certainly is a skill that I think is sorely lacking in organizations, and we need to make sure that we are approaching it in the appropriate way. And it is both a skill and a technical skill, but it's also a mindset and a leadership and a management mindset that we need to adopt. So I really encourage you to listen there. We're doing this in two parts. So part one, we've recorded, and we will come along and do part two, which we dig into his Project Canvas, which is the methodology that he uses. But sit back and listen to Antonio Nieto Rodriguez giving you expert advice on the subject of project management. Antonio, thank you indeed. I'm really grateful to you to join us here on the podcast. It's a great opportunity for us to talk to you about your book, which I see behind you, but is also the book that to show that I have bought it and I did read it, and it was fantastic. It was really great.
Thank you, John. It's a pleasure to be here with you, and thank you for getting a copy of my book. But I love what you're doing, John, so about team performance and leadership. So I thought it's so much connected to projects and the project economies, and I was really happy to be invited.
Now, listen, it's great to have you here. What we will do is that this is going to be part one of two, because in the second interview, I want us to kind of dig a bit more into the system that you have, your Canvas approach, and dig into that. But let's talk about some of the information in the book. One of the startling piece of data that you share early on in the book is that projects, there's about $38 trillion invested in projects, yet only 35% are successful. I mean, that is just, when you think about that, the 65% of 38 trillion, I don't know, I didn't do the maths, but it's a big number anyway. I mean, it is staggering, isn't it? And I'm just curious from you, when you see that number and look at that number, what do you see as being kind of the number one? If you had to pick one reason as to why they fail, what would it be?
Yeah, John. So I agree that the numbers are appalling, and I tell the project management community that I feel ashamed, and we should feel ashamed. There are many reasons, of course, and many of these researchers are very qualitative. Is asking people, do you think your project was successful, yes or no? So, but anyway, bringing these details out of the context, what I think is definitely project success can be significantly improved. And for me, to your question, John, if there's one area, I think there's three big areas that people need to work is on the project management profession and the project managers, on the organizations, the way they're built have to be much more agile and project driven. But the number one point, where we're going to your question, trying to be focused, is senior leadership. Absolutely. If I have to choose one point, senior leaders, they've not evolved, they're not prepared, they don't have the competencies, they don't understand projects, they don't appreciate projects. And I think that's for me the biggest area where I've been working on, and the book is also target for that senior leaders, which I think they need to lead this change.
Yeah. And when you talk, I absolutely agree with you. And I'm just curious, when you say that, and I know that in the book you go through there's a huge amount of content, of valuable content. Is it a skill deficiency? Is it a mindset deficiency? Is it a leadership deficiency, or is it all of the above?
I would say all of the above, but we can again. I think it's a bit of a neglection. I don't think project management is too complex. I think projects are complex, but there are many other things that are more complex. But I think it has been neglected. It's been, okay, let's launch projects. They've not really put a lot of emphasis on the importance of prioritization and focus. They also have not prioritized in building competencies for project management throughout the organization. So I think it has been not in their agenda. It was never a priority. It was only when the pandemic happened, John, this is very interesting, they suddenly say, okay, we need projects to survive. We need to focus on projects. That's the only way we can make it. So I always refer to what happened in the first months of the pandemic, because that's what I've been preaching. And many people are preaching on when you talk about projects, prioritize them, be focused, dedicate time. One point that came across in one interview, John, was the Pfizer of the CEO of Pfizer said, well, in the Pfizer development of the COVID, I spent 100% of my time. I usually don't spend any time in projects. Right? So I think really it's that kind of what I would say. It's neglection or not prioritization of these competencies.
Yeah. And just when you're talking about that, I mean, it's interesting when you look at what Albert Bourla said about the Pfizer and the fact that, you know, he was 100% focused on that. Does that suggest that in organizations we end up with too many projects on at the same time?
Yeah. Well, great question. And you cannot imagine the number of companies I come across, small, medium size, and large, where they're starting to have more projects than employees. Imagine, because we love to start projects. It's human nature, right? It's exciting, and we just copy, and we saw the competition is launching this product. We need to go behind, and it's normal that there's more project launches, but we are really terrible on prioritization. And then we're terrible leaders, again, is on closing projects and on canceling projects. Say we launch, I always say, you want to get better in projects? Two things, John. First, cancel 50% of your current projects right now. 50, nothing will happen. Second, I think dedicate time to those projects. The top three, put time of you, and you're going to do much better.
That is just so against how people will just, I mean, because I can just hear that conversation going on, and people, because we've got to stop some projects. That just seems like an anathema, isn't it, to so many organizations? And if you're looking in terms of the prioritization of the projects, I mean, I know this is kind of a difficult question to ask in some ways because it's context driven, but what is the sort of criteria that says, okay, it's that project as opposed to we're going to drop that one? What are the things you should have in your mind as a criteria for the selection of your priorities?
That's a great question, John, and it's a difficult one. If it would be straightforward, then everybody would do it. But I think it's a question of first knowing what are the priorities of the organization, knowing that your focus is on the customer, for example, or on compliance, or on or automation, whatever is the top 2 or 3 priorities. I have a concept called the hierarchy of purpose for selecting projects, and it starts with the purpose, with the mission of the company, and then the priorities, if it's cost efficiency, if it's customer, if it's expansion, but don't have 10. You need to be radical on those. And then every project that doesn't fit with those priorities, then you just don't do it. Basically, that's super simple. Another way to prioritize, which is very effective, is using, I use 3 types of projects. One is the one which is about enabling your efficiencies, right? So for that, you need to, they're simple projects. For that, maybe dedicate 50% of your resources. Sustaining is evolving your products. For example, you have the iPhone 10 and then you launch the iPhone 12. It's difficult, but it's not new. That's maybe 30% of your portfolio projects. And then depending if you're in a very aggressive and changing industry, 20% on completely radical innovation. So this is, again, what I'm trying to say, John, is we need to simplify these methods of prioritization. And I do that in the book, and I just told you a couple, so that we can take this decision quickly and not going into the traditional way of putting many criteria, many weights, because that takes you 6 months to just calculate that.
Yeah. One of the things that strikes me when I talk to organizations is that when you talk about project management in organizations, and very often project management has kind of got a bad reputation in organizations, and it's almost seem like a bad word in organizations, or a necessary evil. Why do you think that, I mean, I know that's an appalling generalization, but as a generalization, I think it's reasonably true. Why do you think that it is just seen as something that is, well, it's not seen as something that's positive?
I don't know, John. I hope I could answer you, but that has been my battle for 25 years. Project management, as soon as you put project management as a title, or people will feel like, this is not for me. This is technical. This is engineering. This kind of very bad perceptions. And I had that. I'm lucky to be able to work with HBR, and I love the teams. They're the most professional teams I've seen in terms of editorial work and promotional marketing. But I've been in a few podcasts or discussions with them where say, "Oh, project management, that sounded super boring." And then I talking to you, I just say this is one of the most important topics that we should be talking about. What we're doing here, John, is prioritization, is selection, is the number of projects, building competencies, the role. So I'm just very frustrating because the name doesn't project what really brings, and I've been fighting for that. I don't know. I always talk more about projects than project management. The project economy. So trying to avoid project management because it's just very diminishing. And it's unfortunate. I don't know how it happened. I don't know how we can call it. I'm moving into implementation specialist, but it's still not really fancy either. So it's a bit of a challenge. Any thoughts?
I also think that it's to me, I think one of the reasons is that we end up kind of focusing on the project tools as opposed to the project, right? Yeah. And we get hung up on the tool that we're using as opposed to the approach and the thinking that goes behind it. And I think that's what it is. Because one of the things that struck me really powerfully in the book, and I've actually quoted you when I've been talking to some teams in recent times, Antonio, because I just thought it was such a powerful thing. You talked about the kind of the organizational ambidexterity, right? Which is really, and I hope I'm going to capturing this right, but it's also about that we're both running the business and changing the business simultaneously, right? And that's really where the projects are coming, because I think if you go back a number of years ago, projects were kind of the ad hoc things, something that was outside of, it was on top of the day job. Correct. But actually what you're saying is this is the day job.
Yes, exactly. And I think that's one of the challenges, John. Glad you bring that forward. This organizational ambidexterity is that you still need to run your business. If you are, I don't know, an airline, you still need to fly your flights and you need to be, but you need to change and adapt much faster than before. So projects become much more relevant and much more in the front, right? So I think that's one of the biggest challenges for established companies, where they need to find a good balance where let's keep doing what we were doing in efficiency and operations, but let's also shift more focus into project-based work. That means different culture, different organization, different rewarding, different competencies. And that's where companies are struggling, that in between. And if you stay too much on the left side, on the efficiency, you're wiped away, right? And if you put too much focus on the change and projects, you might be wiped away too, right? So that's it's a very, very complex matter that needs attention. You can solve it, but you need to discuss it. It has to be a CEO, executive board discussion where do we put the balance? How far do we want to do? How do we build these competencies? And I'm afraid many companies, many leaders don't discuss these things.
Yeah, and I think that concept is such an important part of people understanding that the projects are the job. It's not actually something that I do when I've got some spare time.
Absolutely.
It is actually the job. One of the things that I was really taken with was is in your 12 principles of successful projects. And just to kind of, I mean, you would go through all of them, but just to pick number 2 was to have, and I quote, an active, ongoing and fully engaged executive sponsor. And that to me is kind of, it's a word that we hear kind of thrown around. Oh, yeah, so-and-so is the sponsor, or that group is the sponsor. And I hate hearing when somebody says we've got a group of people who are responsible, because that actually means that nobody's responsible. But anyway, maybe can you define for us what you see as the role of the executive sponsor?
Well, I think the role of the executive sponsor should be the one who really drives the project. It's something that it not necessarily needs to be always an executive. I think it can be the project manager who's so strong and leader who drives the project, right? But for me, it's that executive who watches out and supports the project leader for any blocking factor to facilitate big decisions quickly. There is no project in the world that can wait 3 weeks before the next steering committee takes place to take a decision, right? So you need a sponsor who's decisive, who can connect with the CEO if needed, who can act when you need that. I think one of the challenges with project is speed. Every day you lose, it's an impact on the deadline. So we need to have those sponsors who are present, who are there to motivate the team, right? To participate in some of the team meetings, who shares the information with the executives. I say, as a sponsor, if you're working in an executive or in a key project, at least half a day per week should be dedicated to your future, which is your project. But most of the sponsors will dedicate an hour per month. So I think there is a lot of change in the time of how leaders allocate their time. I would say a lot of it today is still on BAU, business as usual, operational. It's a lot, maybe 80, 90%, a bit of strategy and very few on projects. And I think that has to radically shift. And I don't see that happening. You see that in the pandemic, it happened, yes. But we need to keep doing that.
And so how do you separate, and that you don't cause confusion between the project sponsor and the project leader and manager? I mean, how do you separate those roles, or do you separate those roles?
Well, I think we've learned over time that at least this is when I study project management, the project manager is responsible of delivering the project. The project sponsor is accountable of the benefits, and I think that is wrong. I think I don't like that distinction. I like the project manager to feel accountable of the benefits too. Not just deliver on time on budget. If the thing doesn't work, well, no, I think we need to. So I want to empower project managers. And I want to empower the project manager to be able to say, hey, sponsor, you're not doing your job. Hey, sponsor, you're not present. Hey, sponsor, I can coach you to do the work if you don't understand. But if you're not there, let's cancel the project, right? It's not going to work. So I'm kind of merging a bit there. I want to move away for saying project manager just responsible of the timeline. So I don't know where that leads to the point of sponsor. The sponsor is the executive who's the name says, the sponsor. I'm behind. I'm the ambassador. I'm helping the project team to go through these difficult moments, to support them. I provide resources. I provide direction. So that's a bit the difference. It's an executive. They have the power. They have the connections. They have the budgets. So that's maybe a better distinction than accountability and responsibility, which I think has led again to the fact that we were discussing, John, that project management is not appreciated.
Yeah. And Antonio, so would that mean that you would not be in favor? Because, for example, I was talking to one organization recently, and we're having the conversation, who's the project sponsor. And the project sponsor was a group of people.
Oh,
right?
Wow.
And my immediate reaction was, I just got a slightly sickening feeling in the pit of my stomach, right? Because to me, the project sponsor is the person who can make a decision, can find the resource. But, if you get a group, to go back to your point, oh, well, we can't actually get the group together for 2 weeks or whatever it might be. Yeah. So would that be an anathema to you to actually have a group as the project sponsor?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that, like you were saying at the beginning, a group, this accountability, nobody is accountable, right? And you want big decision. I think we need to move out from trying to stereotype and put everything in boxes. There will be projects where you need 2 or 3 people who are really driving this. I'm sure for the COVID vaccine in Pfizer or Moderna, there were many people as a sponsor, right? And they were driving. The ultimate is the CEO, of course, and then the board. But it's also to the point where people tell me, well, the CEO is the ultimate sponsor. Yeah, right. But the person has to do other things too. So you are delegating. So for me, it's not who does it, or it's just making assumptions. It's like, let's discuss it. For this project, we might need 2 sponsors, and these are the people. So thinking and acting accordingly, purposefully, saying, okay, for this role, it's transversal, it's impacting many parts of the organization. We need 2 sponsors, and that's the role of the sponsor. So taking case by case, especially for your top 5 projects, and understanding the importance of these roles and appointing the right people, that's what we should be doing. I would try to standardize this a bit, but I think every project, like a digital transformation, requires some thinking about these key fundamentals, which I call the governance part.
Yeah. And if I can move on, because you mentioned people there, and your number 5 principle of 12 is that people matter more than process. And one of the challenges that I see in many projects starting out is how you ensure you get the right people, not just kind of a representative group of people, but how you get the right people on the project, and how important it is that you really create, rules of engagement of how they're going to work together. That's a big challenge. And sometimes we as you said, go back, we focus on the tools, we focus on the process, we focus on the structure, we focus on the governance, but maybe we don't spend as much time on making sure we've got the right people and they're working the right way.
I like John, your questions. They're spot on. I think this is what you're asking me is where I think most of the improvements can be done. And what you're saying is the selection of people working in your projects, it's mostly a disaster. It's just one of the areas where I think this is terrible, because how most organizations do it is first they see who's available, who has a bit of spare time to work on this very strategic project, right? Who has 10% of their time to dedicate to these very strategic projects, which I like the HBR chief editor, Adi Ignatius, was saying, your projects are your future. So why do we put the people who are available 10% of the time? So I say, and it's again very simple, is first of all, when you're launching a project, ask for volunteers. There's nobody more engaged than a project than volunteers, right? Which companies do that? Zero. Yeah, they appoint and say, okay, congratulations, John, tomorrow you're starting this project. Good luck. And you say, I don't have time. I don't care about what you're talking. It's not my field of expertise. So asking for volunteers. And to that point, very simple. If nobody volunteers, John, what does it tell you? That project is crap. Yeah. So why don't we embrace this? And of course, it's exaggerating. You need if you're developing an application, you need developers, but ask them who wants to join this project. And do you have time to it? If you don't have time, then we have a problem. We need to free up time. So for me, that's the biggest challenge: allocation of resources, asking for volunteers. Back to one of our first points is, I always say, senior leaders, every time you start a new project, kill 2. If you don't kill 2 projects to free up, don't start it. Don't start it, because you're adding more pressure. So the project that you launch is going to be a mess, and 2 or 3 others are going to be hit as well. So have the courage of killing 2 or 3 projects before you launch any project. Free capacity, and then get the best people, right?
And how do, when you, I'm just smiling to myself, because I can just imagine, Antonio, you saying that in some organizations that I'm thinking of, okay, you start this project, kill 2. That would be, oh my God, how what reaction do you get when you say that?
I think they're shocked. They say we've never killed projects. Listen, we slow them down, we park them, but killing, no, it's so difficult. And but it takes that step. It's like they feel like there's a void afterwards when you kill a project. And when I've worked with organizations killing those projects, they love it. Once they see, well, there's no impact. And people are relieved. Actually, they are relieved when you do that rightly, and then they are able to dedicate more time to this new project, strategic. It's a blessing, right? We're talking about overwhelming change fatigue. I think this comes because people have too many projects. There's no focus. So I do think that it's a core skill that leaders don't have, is that prioritization, selection, canceling, and sponsorship.
Yeah. And talking about core skills of leadership and managers, I mean, organizations now are so much less hierarchical than they were. They're much more, they're flatter organizations. They're much more matrix organizations. So, the typical project will not function within that hierarchical structure, will be much more in a matrix. How important is it to ensure that your skilling, or the person who's leading the project, managing the project, has the skills to influence in that matrix structure where there isn't that hierarchical environment?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it plays a big role, the organization, the culture, what we were talking about, availability of resources. I always come across this problem where you launch strategic projects, but then the colleagues in another department don't want to contribute, right? They say, I love the project, but how I'm going to be evaluated? I'm evaluated on my KPIs, which is my business unit. So I'll send you whoever is available for a few hours. That's it. So that power of embracing is something that I see across many organizations, which CEOs don't realize until you start working on this project-based approach. And my recommendation, John, is a bit more radical. Is say, okay, we have this 1,000 people organization or 10,000 people. What are our 5 top projects? This one. So who is going to work there? Extract them. Just don't put them in your structure. Don't put them in a matrix. Just make them individual, like startups. Put them there in a different room, in a different building. Of course, not all of them will be working 100%, but most of them, put them there and let them run and let them make decisions, empower them, give them budget, whatever, extract them. You cannot change an organization, any culture, in 3 years, 5 years? So why would you bother in trying to put a project in a matrix, right? That's my conclusion after many years trying to work in matrix. I say, extract it. Why not? Why don't we extract projects?
So you just say, what your recommendation is, take that project team and just take it out of the operation, the day-to-day operation, and actually put it over there so that they work together as a collective.
Exactly. That's what Apple did with the Project Purpose. They created a new building and Steve Jobs was there and most of the people work full time. Why can't you know that? It's your future. So how acceptable do you,
it's a great idea and I get the logic of it. I'm just wondering, how acceptable is that in organizations when you propose that?
They're scared. They're, okay, we've never done that before, most of us, and we're part-time, and if we need people full-time, we hire consultants, right? Yeah, right, that's what happens. But consultants are good for many things, but not for all of them. So I think have the courage to do that. And okay, don't want 5, take 1. And they take 1 and they love it, John. And I think what I'm trying to say, and I know you know this, is that once you try to stop projects, want to ask volunteers for your projects, once you sponsor projects, once you focus on 3 and make your company proud of what I always say, if you want to have 1 project in your company that make people proud, right? If you don't have that, you're a terrible leader. I tell that to see it. What is the project that you are sponsoring that make people proud, that go home and say, I'm working on this project? If you're not, then you're a bad CEO. But anyway, so what I'm saying is just try it. Put a team of 20 people like you would put consultants. Put some consultants, probably you need them, but put the team there too.
Yeah, great idea. Great idea. And I love it. Antonio, I want to pause the conversation here, because when I say pause, I want to come back and have a second one, because what I want to do on the next conversation is that you have what you call Project Canvas, which is kind of got three domains: the foundation, the people, and the creation. And there's a huge amount of richness in that I'd love you to share with the audience. So we'll come back and we will do the second interview in a short period of time, because I think it merits it, rather than trying to
Sure.
rush through. That's okay with you?
I love that.
Okay.
John. I hope the audience will follow on, and in between, if they have any question, John, why they don't contact you?
Absolutely. I know, absolutely. And if they got any questions, I'd be delighted to actually get those questions and include that. Before we wrap up, just two questions that I ask every guest who comes on the podcast: is a book other than your own that has had a significant impact upon you?
I like to say one of my partners in the Strategy Implementation Institute. My partner is Robin Spekulan. He's an expert in strategy and has been a pioneer in digital transformation. His recent book published this year was The World Best Bank, and it's about the Singaporean bank, DBS, and their journey. And it's really, when you're trying to learn digital transformation, I think it's super well explained. It has the CEO view. So The World's Best Bank.
The World's Best Bank. That's a new one to me. So that's great. I love getting new additions to my list. And second is, one of the things I know from interviewing successful people is that they all have daily rituals that they adhere to. Now, they're different and varied, but I'm just curious what yours are and how they help you.
Well, I would say I'm not super ritual, but what I know, John, is I know where I'm best during the day. And it's early morning. So I try to focus my agenda in where my energy is the best to do, for example, writing of the book or LinkedIn courses or this important in the morning. So I start with that early in the morning, and then I move later on into emails and LinkedIn. So I try to be a bit of, maybe that's a habit, is to have a bit of structure during my most performing hours. I know after lunch I'm a bit of a mess, and it's every day is different, and my energy is not the same. So I try to. It took me time to understand that this was where I work best, and then I do the rest afterwards. So that's maybe the habit that I keep doing, and it has worked really well when I see the things that I do. So yeah, think about when is the best timing for you, and do the most important things there.
It's good advice. Antonio, thank you for joining us here today. I look forward to actually continuing and doing part 2, but this has been fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you, John, and thank you for what you're doing.
Thank you.